Welcome to the Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership Podcast. Subscribe now so you don't miss a drop of straight talk you can't get anywhere else. We discuss the whiskeys to drink, music to listen to, and what it really takes to be an effective leader. I'm your host, Galen Bingham, the leadership strategist. Tonight's guest, founder and CEO of the National Fellowship of Black and Latino Male Educators, Keith Brooks. Hey, what you drinking? Okay, guys, we're gonna get right to it because this is a conversation that everyone has been telling me that I need to have. If you go back through my library and pick out some of the dopest interviews I've ever had, you're going to see some of those conversations with Miss Shana Renee Hammond. I think I've had her on like 2 or 3 times. With Mr. Dr. Peter James, I've had him on a couple of times. With Dr. Precious Boyle, with Miss Michelle Navarez. All of those are amazing, brilliant giants in this thought leadership space. And, you know, a little peek under the tent. At the end of each of my conversations with these folks, I always ask, who else do you believe I need to have on this show? And all of those folks, all of them have said, well, Galen, you need to have Mr. Keith Brooks. As a matter of fact, why haven't you had Keith Brooks on your show? So, I'm just going to yield to popular demand and introduce to everyone Mr. Keith Brooks. Welcome to the show, my man. What's going on?
What's up, man? That's too generous. I'm just gonna leave it at, I'm learning to just sit in it. So I'm gonna sit in it.
Hey, man, you earned it. You might as
I
well
earned it.
enjoy it. Well, hey, man, I can't wait to get into this conversation. But everyone knows that I've said too much on the front end already, because they're not even listening until I ask this very, very important question. So here we go to kick this thing off. So what you drinking?
I don't know if you can see this. Can you see what I'm drinking?
Yeah, I got you. I got you. What is that?
So that's so Celsius, the Live Fit New Craze drink. So I give you there's a reason why. One is I didn't drink in college. Like I didn't drink all the way through, I'll say probably like late 20s. And I probably in my lifetime has only drank like, 20 times. So I have just never had a taste for it. And so what I do drink, what I find is that these Celsius things give me that sort of fizzle that other people need from the like champagne and all that. So it's kind of healthy for you. It's one of those energy drinks that's a little bit healthier. And I'm a fruity drink type person. So it just hits all the right spots, Galen.
All right, hey, that will work. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna have to look for that one because I haven't had that one.
I also, it only has to, if you Google it, like I did, energy drinks are not all good for you. This is probably somewhat not good for you, but it has 200 milligrams of caffeine. And so I'm not like my circadian rhythm is I work better during the morning. After like 3 o'clock, man, I'm like, don't ask me to do any hard thinking. So this drink is my version of alcohol because it has just a little bit of caffeine in it.
See, man, we haven't even started the conversation, and you already talking about circadian rhythms and your prime time for getting into your thing. So but that just means that I need to reveal the whiskey that I decided to pull out for this conversation because I
Go
put a
for it.
lot of thought into what I select based upon the guest that I'm going to have. With this one, I know that this is going to be a master class type conversation for our listeners and for me. I mean, I'm going to be asking some questions, but I'm going to be taking some notes as well.
Mhm.
So I decided to reach for a brand that is typically on the top shelf of most bars. But this is a step beyond what you usually see at most bars. So, a Woodford Reserve, but this is the Masters Collection. Woodford
Mhm.
Reserve, batch proof. And this bad boy clocks in at 123.6 proof. So this, I mean, even for someone who clears the bottle and bond 100 proof mark pretty frequently, like myself, this is big boy stuff.
What is 100? What's the name of it? I got to Google this stuff.
This is Master's Collection, Woodford Reserve. So Woodford Reserve is pretty well known and pretty widely available, but this Master's Collection version, that's something else. That's
And
that's a
it's
different.
120 proof.
It's 123.6.
Ugh.
And once you get above 120, that 3.6 is really important.
So what is the proof? The amount of alcohol, like how
That's
much is going
that's the amount of alcohol and how much it's going to take to get it done. So
to.
this is some big boy stuff. Let me go ahead and get this going. Hold on one second. And then we're gonna pour a little bit of this in here. Just
Go for it. There we go.
and the problem with this one is that although it's 123.6, it doesn't drink like it's 123.6, which is a problem. Because if it had the burn of 123.6, your taste buds would be saying, all right, dude, you might want to chill. But this one drinks pretty smooth. So I'm gonna get into this, man, just a little bit. I'm gonna nurse this through our conversation so I can stay cogent. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about your background, where it began, because you've come up through a road. I don't know if you've always envisioned doing what you're doing now, or if education has always been your sweet spot. But it's kind of interesting to see your journey, to know how you and I have met, and then what you're doing now. So share that a little bit with the audience, and then we can get into this conversation.
I just have memories of, they say your earliest memories are like five. For me, that's about right. And at around 5 years old, my grandmother passed. The rest of our family sort of split. And so all of us, all of my aunts and uncles lived in one house. And when my grandmother passed, they all moved into a different, went their separate ways. And that was the beginning of the end for my family. And so I'll just give some context. So all the males, my first cousins and even my uncles, I would say, ended up in jail some point in their life. But my mom, she, religion, but also just she had some very strict standards for how she wanted to raise her boys. And so she was very protective of us. So fast forward, as I got older, the funny thing is, Galen, I didn't know what poor was until I went to college. Even though I was low in, all the titles, all those things. My mom, she went to garage sales. She kept the house clean. We always had new stuff. Now, granted, she put stuff on layaway, and I don't know if she ever paid for it, but I didn't know that I was poor, until somebody said you're from a low income household and you had to check the box or whatever. And so, that was my sort of what I grew up in. I grew up with during a time where, when other people were hearing certain things, I was hearing sort of God has a plan for your life, can be this or that, you know what I mean? So I believed it.
Walk us up to and what you're doing now, so that we can see that through line of how everything kind of connects.
Yeah. So I have to start in high school. When I got to high school, tracks in my high school, there was the magnet track, and then there was the other track. And what I realized, and this is like educational pathways. And so what I realized is that I was on sort of the other track, the track where there was the magnet track where kids would graduate and they would go to college. And then there was the other track where I don't know where they went after school, after they graduated. I knew they would come back, and I know that's not good. And so I went to my guidance counselor and I said, "Hey, I want to be in the honors classes." Because some of my friends were in there, and so I got lucky, and she said yes. And
Mm.
so that changed the trajectory of my career. Ended up at Colgate University, which is a prestigious university, and then graduated, went to teaching, spent half my career in public schools, and then I spent the other half in charter schools, founded a middle school as a principal. The reason why I connected that dot is because what I do now is I focus on increasing the number of Black and Latino males in education, and I focus on supporting leaders with emotional intelligence. The reason there were three things that were catalysts to what I do now. One is my high school experience. I got lucky, and no child, no adult should have to get lucky in order to have a good life. The second was I was the only Black male principal out of 32 schools, and being the only is real. And so while other folks were thinking about, student work and all these things, I was thinking about, do I even belong in this room? And then the last one is no amount of technical coaching or skill development was going to help me thrive as a leader. And so I was introduced to emotional intelligence and changed the trajectory of my career, but also my life. I use emotional intelligence muscles every day as a
Mm.
husband, as a dad, as a son.
Wow. And that's how you and I met, going through that program. And you were always one of a handful of folks who I felt an energy coming that wasn't always loud, but it was always focused, and that's what created the intensity.
Right.
It's like when you would say things, even today, because we work on a couple of different things together. But when you speak, there's a seriousness, there's a focus to it that brings attention, not in a bad way, not in an intimidating way, not in a scary way, but in a way where you've got to pay attention. This can't be the first time you've heard that commentary, and has that always been the case for you?
Galen, everybody says, my wife, my granddad, I've been an old man since I was young. I would wake up early in the morning, 6 o'clock, and read the newspaper as a teenager. I've always been, part serious, but I think to the idea of focus, like I've always just been that way. Even in college where other folks are doing certain things, spring break, I'm getting my work done. I'm like planning for the next couple of things, you know what I mean? That's both, has its pros and its cons, but I've always been an old soul, Galen, like
Mm.
always. First year teaching, you're 20 something, you're supposed to be, out like the other teachers, they were out on South Beach, living in the singles, condominiums or whatever. I had got married, I had a car, bought a house. Yeah, I've always been in that way, Galen.
Gotcha. And then something in your story I want to tie into because I could relate to, and it was the idea that you just asked if you could be in the honors classes. It wasn't like you were necessarily showing incredible aptitude in the classes, and someone said, "Hey, wonder if you could, make this thing happen." You just rolled up and say, "Look, can I be in the honors classes because there's something about what's going on over there that's different than what's going on over here?"
Hmm.
And I want to ask you about that as an educator, but it reminds me of how growing up, my dad would impose this extra standard on whether or not we could play sports.
Hmm.
I think the standard for at the schools was that you had to have a C average or something to play sports. My dad would say, "Well, I don't care what their standard is. You can't
Was
play
it B?
sports unless you have a 3.0 or better."
Yeah.
And so I just okay, well then that's the standard, and I would work up to, and it's funny, my GPA was always 3.0 or 3.1, but not much farther than that. So I've always wondered if my dad had said you have to have a 4.0 to play sports, I wonder if I would have worked hard enough to make that happen. What's your thought about what happened with you where they just said, "Okay, yeah, you're in this honors class and you're watching the pace of the folks around you, and whatever that level was, you stepped up to be capable of being in the honors program, whereas previously it might have been questionable, but you didn't have the standard to reach until you were actually in it."
So in education, there's a thought of we have to tell kids the truth, which is you're from this neighborhood, society thinks this, and we in a way that we're thinking that we're helpful, we are training kids that they're not capable or they're less than. But for me, the reason why I share that is because I was able to go and ask is because I thought I deserved it. I thought I could do it. I believed. But if somebody said, "Hey, you're low income, you're from this, black people that, and da da da," I didn't grow up in that, and we just have to be mindful of what enters into our in between our ears and sinks into our brains. I've always been this way. Like when I was in elementary, when I was in pre-K, I wasn't in the top reading book, and I was like, something's wrong with that. I need to, you know what I mean? When I got into fourth grade, I remember there was a gifted class, and then I was like, why am I not in the gifted? Like, what? And then in this, so I've always been sort of like, huh? I want some of that. Give me some of that. Give me two of those. You know what I mean?
I love it. I love it. And then there's another question I seem to go back to quite often. And this is and I quote this guest all the time. I'm actually doing work with him now. Mr. Jared Simmons and I believe it was season 2. Jared, brilliant cat, like Procter Gamble, McKinsey, just smart for no real reason to be that smart. He's that smart. And he's also a coach. And so we got into this conversation about, is a coach a coach a coach? So, I coach everyone. I coach in every industry. I coach men. I coach women. I coach African Americans, non African Americans. You can coach anyone. Or is there value to the coach having shared experiences? Is there an extra value to teachers having and reflecting a shared experience with their students? Is there value to this cultural similarity, or is a teacher just a teacher? Once you're a good teacher, you're a good teacher.
I was a philosophy major, so there is no real right or wrong answer to this. You just have to make your case. And I don't know, Galen. On one hand, I preach that representation matters, but I also see how when you have shared identities, it creates like me bias. And then there's an affinity where you don't push or you don't challenge or you don't do certain things. I think that's what you're saying with the second part of your question. So is there a benefit in having a shared experience? Absolutely. So long as you have the awareness to know when you might be, where you might be enabling based on your shared experience, that sends you down into a rabbit hole that you can't get you or the person you're trying to coach out of.
Okay, so it has to do with kind of the outcome. I like the way one of these leadership gurus said it. I think it was Ken Blanchard. He said, "In leadership, there's no right or wrong. There's only effective and ineffective." I guess what I'm hearing is that you're looking at the outcome. Are you able to be effective as a teacher, regardless of whether you got the shared identity or not?
My brain thinks in black and white sometimes. So when you say that, yes, to some degree, but there's something about, for example, if I walk into a room and I see you as my educator, it's just a different type of swagger that you have, Galen, that actually automatically I sit up a little bit straighter.
Mm,
I stand up a little bit taller because now Galen's leading all of you all and me, right?
mm.
And so versus somebody else could be equally skilled, but have a different identity. I'm just thinking observable now, but think about any identity that you can see or you can't see. So what I'm saying, Galen, is yes and no.
I get it. Hey, I get it. Well, hey, let's get right into probably one of my favorite parts of my conversation is I like to ask my guests to help me articulate the name of the podcast and what this thing means. Because for me, this is just how I think, right? I like whiskey, I like jazz, I like leadership, but the metaphor also has a lot of weight with me. And so for me, the metaphor of whiskey is doing what you enjoy with your crew, with like-minded folks that you just rock with, that you guys vibe. So doing what you enjoy with your crew, irregardless of what other folks outside of your crew think about it at times, because they're not part of your crew. the metaphor of jazz is this idea that you've got to get from where you are to where you need to be, even when there aren't instructions around as to how to do it. And there's no sheet music available, or the plan that you have doesn't fit the situation anymore. You've got to improvise, you got to find your way, you got to feel your way, but you got to get to the other side on time and in key. And that's the metaphor of jazz for me. And the metaphor of leadership really comes down to action. We can talk about what needs to happen. We can strategize about what needs to happen. We can create beautiful white papers and graphics about what could happen. But until someone stands up and says this is going to be different starting right now, because we're taking this action today, until there's an action, then nothing is ever really going to happen. So for me, that's how whiskey, jazz, and leadership fits. How does that metaphor fit with what you do and what you've done in order to be successful?
Yeah, something you had mentioned, Galen, was about this idea of whiskey being able to enjoy your passions, even if no one else is around to witness it. Sometimes when you just, I imagine, sitting down just drinking your whiskey, and that's all you need. It's just you and your whiskey. I've heard you also describe this idea of jazz being a little bit of sheet music and a whole lot of improv. And those two concepts boil down to me to two words, fun and finesse. And so finessing really for me is about handling what life throws at you artfully and skillfully. Sometimes I've gotten the finesse right and not the fun. And sometimes I've gotten the fun right without the finesse. And so being able to balance both of those is this idea of, what the idea of sort of whiskey jazz brings for me to how I try to live my life is a whole lot of fun and a whole lot of finesse.
Love it, man. I love it. And then just this idea of it's one thing to be a teacher in the classroom. I have tried my hand at facilitating undergraduate classroom conversations, and even that's a whole nother level than what I was expecting. I can't imagine what it's like in the elementary, in the high schools, to stand in front of a classroom and to teach. And then not only are do you have experience with doing that, then you go to the next level where you're not necessarily the teacher, but you're the administrator. You're kind of empowering and you're overseeing how other teachers are teaching in front of the classrooms. But now you're in the process where you're developing schools, you're a director, you're developing programs, you're guiding a fellowship, which is maybe even one or two more levels removed. How in the world do you do all of that and still have confidence that you're making a difference?
That's two separate questions. How in the world do you do that, and how do you do that and have faith that you're making a difference? I have this philosophy about time. So, I used to think of time in terms of a balance. And I know people have said this, but Galen, you have 1,440 minutes every single day. As soon as you wake up, depending on what time you wake up, what I mean, it's like a gun goes off. And so for me, when I think about that, if I don't have 60 minutes out of 1,440 to go to the gym,
Mm.
something's wrong with me. If I don't have, let's just call it 120 out of 1,440 to hang out with my kids. And so how do I get it all done? I mean, obviously I have structures and systems, but like there's no way I can't live a life that's both, high on the professional side and high on the personal side. I have sort of the Steve Harvey, the Kevin Hart sort of mindset when it comes to work. I was watching Shaq one time and I saw him seven different companies in one day. Or I'm like, what am I doing? Why? What is this idea of one job or what
Mm.
have you? And so I think that's such small thinking now of what we're capable and what our potential is. And so when you ask me, how do I get it all done? It's because I just see the world differently now. So there's no struggle for me. Whatever. I don't work on the weekends, don't work at night. I put my phone away at 3 o'clock
Mm.
and I'm done. So, And then do I have an impact? I stopped trying to, we focus on outcomes and all that and metrics, and that's how I live my life. But I don't measure my life based on those outcomes and those things. I measure on, I said I'm going to do X before I die. Am I doing X before I die? And the outcomes and those things are for other people. That's not for me. If I'm living the life I said I want to live, if I, doing what I'm called to do, I win.
I love it. I love it for a couple of reasons. I have observed you seemingly going down that path even before I knew that that was the path that you were on. And to give a little insight to some of the listeners who aren't coaches, I just had this conversation with another coach colleague yesterday, and we're talking about in order to be an effective coach, you have to have this detached curiosity where you're curious about the other person, but you detach yourself from the outcome to a certain degree. Because once you become attached to the outcome, then it gets hard to ask those critical questions. And that's why I do a terrible job of coaching relatives and friends because I'm kind of attached, right? I really want them to win. And it gets really, really hard. But you seem to, whenever I've interacted with you, you always seem to have this detached curiosity where you've got some ideas, you've got some goods, you got, some suggestions, but you're more interested in how in the world are you going to work through this issue that's in front of you. Has that always been part of your makeup, or is that something that you've learned throughout the years?
I've learned, imposter phenomenon or workaholism or, what's the word? It's the technical, I guess the technical inferiority complex. It's the idea that we measure our value based on what others think of me. I'm a people pleaser, relationships, all those things. And those are strengths, and it's helped me get to a certain point. But but if I'm not careful, it can also be my kryptonite. And so I
Mm.
had to develop this mantra of my life and my value isn't measured by what people think of me. I'm more than enough. And so I've had to measure my life that way. And it's hard to do that, especially in the world that we live in, especially when you get PD feedback, whatever, coaching feedback, whatever, you get 10 no's in a row. But I've had to do that because if I don't do anything else in my lifetime, man, I've lived my wildest dreams and my parents' wildest dreams and my ancestors' wildest dreams. I've done enough.
And again, I always like to ask my guests about their invisible board of directors. With most of my guests, I get a lot of similar names. I think Oprah Winfrey, Tyler Perry, and Jesus Christ are the hardest working board members on the planet because they're on everyone's invisible board. But yours is a little different. Talk a little bit about who's on your invisible board and why. What role do they play as a member of your invisible board?
Harriet Tubman would be on my board because Harriet Tubman, you don't think of her as a leadership guru. There's no books, in the book in the business section, Harriet Tubman's philosophy, leadership philosophy, but her leadership philosophy was you're not measured by you getting to the destination. You're measured by how many people you get to freedom and get to the destination. So you have to go back to get others. And so that idea of going back to get others is powerful. What I've heard, I don't quote me on this, but she was paralyzed in some parts of her body while she was doing all this because of being beaten by slave masters. And so the fact that Harriet Tubman was paralyzed, going back and forth and building underground, right? Like, Galen, I can't wake up and do X. I can't do this fellowship and something else and be a good husband and dad. Right? Like, are you kidding me? Like, I come from that. So Harriet Tubman, and then the families of my students. Whenever I thought about making hard choices, I had to think about the parent of that student being in the room when I had to make that decision. And what would they think of me? What would they think in those moments? I want to have somebody, I can be so serious. So I want to have more lighthearted people on there too. But so I haven't picked the right one. Just to say, don't take none of this serious. We're going to all die one day anyway.
Wow. Well, I mean, those are pretty good starters. I mean, if you're going to build a board, you got the foundation for a board, even if you add members later on. Man, I can't believe how fast the time is slipping away from us. Oh my gosh, let's see. Uh, I hear you, VIPs. We're coming, VIPs. Hold on, just hold on. I gotta ask one more question. So Keith, we're talking to folks who are thinking about how to become a better leader, and we're going to get into a whole lot more of this in the VIP room. But how would you describe, if you have a leadership philosophy, how would you describe what goes into being an effective leader?
If there's an overused word, it's leader. If there are way too many books on the topic, it's leadership books. And so I chuckle because, me giving another opinion is me just feeding into that same fuel. Here's what I would say is that the idea of if nobody's following you, you're not leading. If you're not willing to risk it all for your values and standards and beliefs, you're not a leader. If you haven't lost some, you're probably not an effective leader. If you haven't made some people upset and you don't have some haters, you're not effective leaders. Leadership is painful. It's hard. It's dangerous. There's the book from Heifetz talking about leadership on the line. Like, if you aren't towing that line of that pit in your stomach, like, you probably are not leading effective, or you haven't had those moments where you have had to lead.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, man. There's got to be a risk of losing something. There's got to be something on the line in order to really call on someone to step up. I love it. Dude, man, we got to get you into the VIP room. We got to get you into the VIP room. But hey, man, how can folks get a hold of you if they want to learn more about this fellowship that you're leading? They want to get more exposure to you, maybe for a project that they're working on. How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So two ways, three ways. One is through the work I do with emotional intelligence. So at the noblestorygroup.com, that's sort of my specialty, what I would say is my genius and expertise. And then through the nonprofit work with supporting Black and Latino male educators, you can go to nfblme.org, nfblme.org, not to be confused with NFL, but NFL
National Fellowship.
Fellowship, Black NFBLME. There you go. .org. So the National Fellowship for Black Latino Male Educators, and then my LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I don't do all the other social media. Otherwise, I'm not spending my 1,440 minutes well.
Man, well, listeners, this guy is the real thing. Definitely worth checking him out. He's one of the folks that I think about, and he's one of the folks that most of my guests think about. So, man, thank you so much. Raise that spritzer again. Thank you for who you are showing up as in the world, the work that you're doing, with the people who you are inspiring to come behind you, because every life well lived has a positive echo behind it, man. So thank you. Cheers. Hey, it's not too late. Hit that subscribe button so you're sure to catch the next episode. If you're really enjoying the vibe, leave us a review or become a VIP for guest and show exclusives. Cheers.